Wonderful. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Irina MacArthur, and I'm Director of Patient Experience at Inception Fertility. It's truly my pleasure to have you here today, and for what I know will be very meaningful and supportive conversation. Today's webinar, Building Emotional Resilience, is led by someone I deeply admire, Dr. Alice Domar. She's not only the Chief Compassionate Officer at Inception, but also Associate Professor at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Domar has been guiding light for so many patients in fertility care. And she will be sharing particular strategy for managing stress, setting boundaries, creating moments of joy, and most importantly, building resilience through the ups and downs. I hope this time will gives you a space to reflect and recharge and take away tools that you can use moving forward. At the end of the webinar, we will have opportunity to answer all the questions that you have. So please do not hesitate to submit your question in a chat box, and we will answer as many questions as we possibly can. And now, please let me welcome to Dr. Domar and pass the floor to her.
Thanks, Irina. Thanks, everybody. I want to apologize that we had to cancel the Monday night webinar at the last second, and it truly was not my fault. It happens to be the fault of an airline, and I won't say names, but it starts with A, and it's the name of our country. And I, on Monday, was simply trying to fly from Boston to Miami and had not one, not two, but 3 flights canceled because of mechanical issues, which gives me so much confidence in flying. But ironically, when I finally did fly down, I was actually seated next to, in the back row, middle seat, of the pilot who was supposed to be piloting my first flight that day. So I thought that was kind of fun. And he told me it actually is safe to fly with both GPS of the plane broken, which is what we did. But anyway, I'm sorry I wasn't here Monday. I was midair somewhere across the eastern United States. So I'm going to talk about how to build emotional resilience over multiple cycles. And, this is something that people ask me all the time. I'm a health psychologist. I've been in this reproductive medicine field for a very long time. I started seeing patients in 1987. And it happens less now that people have to go through multiple cycles before they can achieve a pregnancy than it did when I first got into the field. Only about 5% of all people who did IVF got pregnant. And, we just finished a study showing that over half of our patients get pregnant on their first cycle. So it's gotten better, but it's still not there. And we really don't know the reasons why everyone's not getting pregnant their first cycle. But I am still seeing patients. I work most of the time for Inception and Prelude, but I still have a small private practice. And so I see infertility patients every week. And, I obviously don't see the ones who easily get pregnant. I see the ones who go cycle after cycle after cycle and test after test after test, who end up seeing all their friends get pregnant and all their neighbors get pregnant and all their siblings get pregnant. And you just feel like you're the only one in the world who's not getting pregnant. And so the reason, we wanted to do this webinar tonight was just to give you some tips, not only how to, become a little more resilient as you go through treatment, but also I really need you to understand you're not alone. This is hard. And if you're feeling like this is really hard, you're right. It's a grueling process. If you can stick with it, the end result is worth it. But if you decide you can't stick with it, that's okay too. As anyone who's ever heard me speak, I, in fact, grade myself by how many questions I get asked. So I would encourage you, I believe there's a box. What's the box, Irina, they can put questions in?
Just chat box.
Oh, okay, that's the technology I'm unfamiliar with. I'm just put questions in the chat box, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have. So can I have the next slide, please, Irina? So, what is resilience? And when I was writing this talk last week, I thought, well, I probably should actually look up what the official definition is, because I know I use it all the time with my patients, with my friends, with my family, but it's really about being able to adapt to difficult or challenging circumstances. And infertility really requires a lot of resilience because, in fact, it affects your mental health, your emotional health, your behavioral flexibility. And there's tons of external and internal demand. So if infertility doesn't require resilience, nothing does. And a lot impacts how resilient any one person is for any given situation. And it depends on that person's point of view. It depends on their view of the world. It depends on their availability and quality of social resources, coping strategies. I'm supposedly writing a manuscript today, but I kept on purposefully distracting myself so I wouldn't have to sit and write the manuscript. And I was actually looking over some of the most recent studies on the emotional impact of infertility. And, what comes up over and over and again is social support. And, if someone's in a relationship and they're going through infertility, having really good support from their partner is very important. If they don't have that, to have it from their family or friends or strangers over the internet. But I really hope you're not doing this alone, because going through infertility by yourself with no support at all is really hard. I don't know if things have changed. I published a study maybe 12 years ago that showed that the majority of women going through infertility didn't even tell their mothers. I suspect people are more open now. Social media's gotten more prominent. So I think more people are talking about it, but I think there's still a lot of people, maybe specifically in different cultures, who just don't talk about what they're going through. Next slide, please. So, and I have to give Irina credit for all these slides, because what happens whenever I do webinars with her is I send her like these black and white slide decks of words, and she translates them into like really great figures and tables that are easy to understand. So, as I said, there are lots of ways to build your sense of resilience. Number one is social support, which we'll talk about. It's just so important not to be alone as you go through this. Learning skills and how to nurture yourself, which I'll talk about later. And then, of course, I'll talk about physical strategies to reduce stress, as well as psychological strategies to reduce stress. And, obviously I can't see any of you, but I can't tell you what's going to work for you. And so what I generally do, if I'm talking to a large group, I give a big talk in Miami on Tuesday. I actually did get there on time. And, I spent the talk listing all these different kinds of stress management strategies, because I knew there was not one way for everybody. And I know there's no one way that I can teach all of you to do. So I'm going to introduce a number of different concepts. And you should pick and choose ones that, reduce your sense of stress, increase your sense of control. And that's how you build resilience. And you do need resilience as you move through infertility and its treatment, because it's hard. I mean, anyone who's heard one of my webinars before, infertility really is unique compared to all the other diseases. It impacts every area of your life, and it's unique in that people tend to blame you for it, which is ridiculous, because it's a disease. The World Health Organization has classified infertility as a disease. So if you have infertility, it's not like you have something you can control. It's a disease in either the female partner, the male partner, or both of them. Next slide, please. So, I've been giving talks on stress and stress management for my whole career. And everyone keeps on asking me, what's the definition of stress? And if you Google stress, you're going to probably find 10,000, or even if you go to AI or ChatGPT or whatever. And I actually learned about AI a couple weeks ago, made me feel very hip. No matter where you look, and if you look for the definition of stress, you're going to get a lot of different answers. And so this is my definition of stress. I'm not saying it's the only one. I'm not saying it's the best one. I'm not saying it's the right one, but this is how I think of stress. And what I think of stress is not having enough resources to meet the demands in your life. So you might not have enough time. You might not have enough money, and these days, who does? You might not have enough health. And in this case, maybe you don't have enough fertility, and you might not have enough social support. And you could have not enough time, or not enough money, or not enough health, or not enough social support, or you could have one, two, three, or four of those. And I have to say, I think right now, most people I know would say they have at least three or four of them. I'd say certainly for my infertility patients, it's really pretty much all four, because treatment takes up so much time out of your day, especially if you're working. It's so hard to get to the clinic in the morning for blood work and ultrasound, and, sit around waiting for results. Treatment's expensive, even if you have insurance, there are co-pays and deductibles. Health, it's tough on your health. It's tough on your mind and body to go through infertility. And as I said, infertility can be very isolating. because you feel that everyone around you is is having babies easily, and they're getting pregnant accidentally, which I still don't get why anyone needs to know that. I don't want to know how often you did or did not have sex to get pregnant. But everyone needs social support. So you need someone who gets it. And if your mom took 2 years to get pregnant with you, or if she had a couple miscarriages between your brother, or your aunt doesn't have children, or your grandmother has 5 years in between kids, there's a chance that someone you know and love has been through infertility or pregnancy loss. And that's not a bad person to sort of casually mention, like, oh, I was watching this TV show the other day and so is going through infertility, and see if they say, oh, I went through that, or I had a pregnancy loss. I mean, I've said this a lot of times. I had a miscarriage, and I told people I'd had a miscarriage, and I was shocked by how many of my close friends had pregnancy losses and had never told anybody. So when you think about your life, think about the resources you have in your life. And, if you don't have enough time, you're going to be stressed because you don't have enough time. If you don't have enough money, you're going to be stressed because you don't have enough money, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how I define stress. And so if someone is like insanely wealthy, if you're Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or whatever, my guess is they're probably not that stressed about money. They may be right now because of the stock market, but in general, they don't worry about paying the mortgage. They don't worry about filling their car with gas. They don't worry about putting food on the table, but they may be very worried about how little time they have, or they may have their partner may have just divorced them, et cetera. So it's a very individual thing. But when you think about stress, think about your resources. And if you're stressed in any of those areas, think about how can you increase the amount of resources in that area? So how can you give yourself a little more time? Is there any way you can get your hands on more money or spend less money in terms of health? If you're seeing a really good infertility doctor, you're doing everything you can. But I think the one most of us need to really work on is social support. We really need kind, loving, compassionate people in our lives, and they are out there. You just need to find them. Next slide, please. So this is something that's very individual. How do you know you're stressed? And the fact is that symptoms of stress can be physical, psychological, or behavioral. And like when I gave this talk on Tuesday morning, one of the first questions I asked the audience, who were mostly men, they were electrical contractors, I said, how do you know you're stressed? And one of them said, I can't sleep. And someone else said, well, I get really bad headaches. Someone else said, I get stomach aches. Someone else said, I get really tired. And someone else said, I get really irritable. So each of us have our own individual responses to stress. I mean, for me, as everybody, everyone knows, I start every sentence every day. Like when I couldn't sleep last night, I was thinking, because when I'm stressed, I just can't sleep. My husband, he'll fall asleep no matter what, but then his neck and his back get stiff. So think about it. How does your body let you know that you're stressed? Do you have physical symptoms? Do you have psychological symptoms? Do you have behavioral symptoms? And your body and your mind is really good about letting you know when you're pushing it too hard. We just don't listen. And have you noticed, as you started in infertility, do you have any new stress-related symptoms? Next slide, please. So as I said before, these are some of the most common physical symptoms. Number one is insomnia. About 85% of people in North America report that they have a hard time sleeping or staying asleep, or they wake up too early when they're stressed. A lot of people, I swear, half the people I know get migraines. People can have stomach issues, abdominal pain, fatigue, neck and back pain, shortness of breath. Women can have menstrual issues. These are just the most common physical symptoms. Next slide, please. Psychologically, I make people laugh, but I say, when I'm really stressed out, I become a bitch. There's no question. But, the most common psychological symptoms are people are irritable, or they worry all the time, or they get really anxious, or they just feel sad, or they feel hopeless. Like, I'm never going to feel better. I'm never going to be happy. They're easily angered. They get confused. I mean, how many of you, and, I guess you can combine confusion and forgetfulness. You walk into a room and you forgot why you walked into the room, or you can't find your car keys, or you can't find your phone. And how many times have you asked someone to call you because you couldn't find your phone? These are actually all symptoms of stress. This is how your body and your mind lets you know that you're really stressed. Next slide, please. Actually, can we go back for 1 second? So, one thing that I feel like I'm kind of a personal campaign for is that, we all have pretty comparable symptoms of stress. As I said, they're pretty common physical symptoms, they're pretty common psychological symptoms, behavioral symptoms. But the problem is we don't listen to our body and our mind. So you're pushing yourself too hard, you're working too much, you're getting up early to go to the clinic for blood work and ultrasound, you're trying to avoid certain people or whatever, and you're just really stressed and you have a headache coming on. And so do you stop and say to yourself, I'm getting a headache. I think my mind and body are trying to tell me I'm pushing myself too hard. Maybe I'll go for a walk, or maybe I'll make myself a cup of tea, or maybe I'll take a nap, or maybe I'll meditate. No. What do all of us do when we get a headache? We take ibuprofen or acetaminophen. If we can't sleep at night, again, do we say to ourselves, my mind is racing. What's going on here? What am I upset about? No, we get up and we take a Tylenol or Advil PM, or we take Benadryl, or we take Ambien, or that little butterfly thing. I think it's called Lunesta, whatever. So what we do is when we have any of these symptoms that your brain and your body are trying so hard to tell you, slow down, pay attention, take better care of me. What we do instead is we go to our local drugstore and we buy probably 90% of what's there is to treat stress-related symptoms. And we do is we take the pill or the liquid or whatever, and our symptom gets better. But we're treating the symptom, we're not treating the underlying cause. And that's what we need to worry about. Because if you keep on having these stress-related symptoms and you keep on simply treating the symptoms, that's when you start to worry about having things like high blood pressure or suppressing your immune system or something like that. Next slide, please. So how can you combat stress and prevent burnout? I mean, this is pretty much what I've dedicated my whole career to doing. One is the first thing, and it's hard to do because all of us say we don't have enough time, is to develop some kind of regular relaxation routine and try to do some form of relaxation 15 minutes a day. And I can tell you it's hard to do this. The easiest way to do it, honestly, is to download an app on your phone. There are lots of them. There's Calm, there's Happify, there's Insight Timer. A lot of them have like 7-day free trial periods. I've been teaching this stuff for almost 40 years, and I have to tell you, I still do better with a guided relaxation. And in fact, last week I was in Philadelphia. There's like the largest gathering of infertility mental health professionals in the country come together, actually North America, come together and talk about the best ways to help people with infertility. And a colleague and I were leading these stress management workshops, burnout prevention workshops. And so we were taking turns leading the group in relaxations. And I'm always the one leading them. I never get led in relaxations, but my coworker was taking turns and she was leading all of us in a relaxation. And I was sitting back going, wow, this feels so good to have somebody else lead a relaxation. So, if you want to walk away from this and think of the best ways to prevent burnout and, improve your resilience, I would try to do some kind of relaxation technique. It can be yoga, it can be progressive muscle relaxation, it can be meditation, it can be imagery. I mean, there are literally thousands of relaxation techniques, but just try a few and see which ones work for you. I personally use the app Calm because I really like the fact that a lot of the people who lead the relaxations have British accents, and I think British accents are sexy. So I like listening to relaxations with British accents. So just try it. Do one of these apps for a week for a free period and just try for a week to do something every day. And you're probably going to find yourself feeling more relaxed and less anxious, which in turn is going to make you more resilient. I think one of the biggest enemies of emotional health or emotional wellness these days is social media. And, as I said, I still have a private practice. I still see infertility patients every week. And, for them, when they look at all the different Snapchats and Instagram and all that stuff, and they see a pregnancy announcement or a picture of a baby bump or an invitation to a gender reveal, it just makes people really upset. And the fact is with social media, people don't tend to post stuff about in their life that's going badly. They post the stuff that they, in effect, want to brag about. Their vacation spots or their new clothes or their new car or their new house or their new baby. And so I would really try to manage social media. I would definitely, what we don't really think about is the light from our phones actually keeps us awake. And so this blue light you don't want to have for about at least half an hour before you go to bed. So no phones in bed, no iPads in bed, try not to watch the news in bed. Um, you know, read a book, talk to a partner, do things that are relaxing before bed, but don't look at social media. And in general, if you can try to cut back on social media, it'll actually really improve your resilience. Um, you want to be, as I said, mindful of the stress-related symptoms. Just check in with yourself. Like, is my heart beating faster than it should be? Are my hands sweating? Do I have a headache? Do I feel short of breath? Does my stomach hurt? Is my neck pain? What's going on with me right now? And what can I do right now to help myself feel better? And then just try to practice relaxation techniques throughout the day. You can do what we call mini relaxations. It's really just a sigh, just like, and if you do that a few times, you're actually going to feel better. And, anyone who knows me knows that I hate flying. I probably fly an average of 6 or 8 times a month. It was actually kind of fun having the pilot sitting next to me, but I do these mini relaxations I don't mind flying. I mind taking off. I should be specific. And so I just do my mini relaxations as we go down the runway because yes, I've been taught the physics of flight. It still makes me anxious that a huge multi-ton bird can take off. But relaxation techniques really work. And, you can use them during your infertility journey. You can use them before and during injections. You can use them before and during blood tests and before and during ultrasounds and before you check the portal for test results or before you call the office or whatever. Use your body, use relaxation techniques, use mini relaxation techniques to control your level of stress. And, finally, learn how to manage difficult situations. One thing I've been doing since I joined Inception almost 3 years ago, actually, is I'm trying to teach patients and staff and physicians how to manage difficult situations. And so I'm teaching a lot of our employees how to use empathic communication, but it goes both ways. You don't think that people who work in the clinic, their feelings get hurt. Their feelings do get hurt. When patients yell at them or call them bad names or whatever, it actually is not a good thing. But in your life, when you're having a difficult situation, if you have a friend who's just told you they're pregnant, or you see a pregnant woman on the street or whatever, try to be respectful of other people, but also, set boundaries. I have told every one of my patients for the last 38 years, however long it's been since I've been seeing patients, you're not allowed to go to baby showers. You're not allowed to go to gender reveals. You're not allowed to go to first birthday parties. Because when we talk about becoming resilient, it means learning what you can do freely and comfortably and learning what you can't do freely and comfortably. And it's really okay not to go to those parties. I mean, send a nice gift, get your favorite books for when you were a little kid. I was invited to a shower of someone actually had been through a pretty brutal time to get pregnant. And the invitation said, just bring your favorite childhood book, which I thought was a really cool idea. Because even if you're going through infertility now, buying the book you loved most as a kid is a lot less painful than having to look at cute baby outfits. Next slide, please. So one thing you need to also look at is to look at your health habits. Because when we think about being resilient, we think of being tough. We think about wearing, armor around us and we're tough. And, being resilient means being healthy. And there are a lot of ways you can improve your health. Sleep is a big one. We are a chronically sleep deprived country. And I can tell you the best way to know if you're getting enough sleep, if your alarm clock is waking you up out of a deep sleep in the morning, it means you're not getting enough sleep. If you're easily waking up before your alarm clock goes off and you're feeling rested, then you're getting the right amount of sleep for you. But if you were being woken up out of a deep sleep, it's a very simple way of knowing. And, everyone's always like, oh, you need 8 hours of sleep. Well, that's actually not true. Everyone's very individual. You might need 9 hours sleep. I mean, I personally need probably 8.5 hours of sleep to be nice. There are a lot of people who do really well with 7 hours. I wrote a book a few years ago with a surgeon who was perfectly charming on 5 hours of sleep. But you need to figure out how much sleep you need, and no one can tell you how much sleep you need. A lot of people, really worry about their exercise habits, their eating habits, etc. It's very, very simple. the diet plan that I tell my patients to follow is not a diet plan at all. It's called the 80-20 plan, where if 80% of what you eat is the good stuff, and we all know what the good stuff is. The good stuff is the fruits and the vegetables and the whole grains and the olive oils and the nuts and the berries and the good fish and the lean meats and that stuff, all the stuff your grandmother probably told you to eat. So the 80% of what you eat is that stuff. The other 20% could be maybe the stuff you crave, whether it's sweet or savory. And, people talk about this all the time, if it's a really well-known phenomenon that if you're actually, like most of us do, you're pretty aware of what you eat. And so for breakfast, you have the Greek yogurt with the berries. And for lunch, you have a salad with, fish on top and dressing on the side. And then at lunch, if you're at work or at a social event, they bring out ice cream or cookies or brownies or muffins and you eat one, you will actually then experience what's called the what the hell effect, which means if you eat the cookie or the brownie or the ice cream, which I would encourage you to eat, you would then experience what's called the what the hell effect, which means you're like, oh, what the hell? I've already broken my diet today. I'm going to have, spaghetti Alfredo and Haagen-Dazs for dinner. No, the muffin or the brownie or the cookie or the ice cream, that was your 20%. And you've had the really good breakfast and you've had the really good lunch and you can still have a really good dinner, but that snack you had at work was your 20%. And what that means is that as opposed to not eating anything sweet for 4 days and then eating a bag of cookies, or not eating anything savory for 4 days and eating a bag of chips, if you have a little of something every day, you're not going to feel deprived and you're not going to eat nearly as much as you would if you deprived yourself. It's just a common sense way of eating. In terms of exercise, this is really between you and your physician. We're designing a new study right now, and we are discussing how much exercise someone going through IVF should be doing. And the problem is that our physicians don't agree. There are some physicians that say continue to exercise as you were before you started trying. There's some physicians that say don't do exercise at all. Some physicians say do moderate exercise, so you can walk, you can swim, but you can't really run or do a Peloton. And I think this is a conversation you have to have between you and your physician. I think overall, the rule of thumb for most of the studies I've seen shows that moderate exercise is the best. I mean, not perhaps if you're towards the middle of your IVF cycle, if your abdomen's very sore, if your body, again, you got to listen to your body. If your body is telling you that, your ovaries hurt, you need to, lie down and lie down and watch White Lotus and, eat ice cream. But again, all of this is common sense. Next slide, please. So, one thing that's really hard for people, and, I don't mean to be sexist here, but I think it's especially hard for women, is how to say no. It's like we feel guilty about saying no. We can't be self-protective. We think people are going to think we're selfish, we're awful, terrible people. And so I think the problem is that we think that we're just not comfortable saying no. And so I actually took a linguistics class years ago, and they were talking about learning how to say no in different ways. And one person, actually, a psychiatrist I worked with, said, you know what? No is a complete sentence. So if someone asks me to bake brownies for some neighborhood affair, I can just say no. I mean, I probably won't. Well, first of all, because I like to bake. But B, because that's something I would not be comfortable saying no to. If someone said, can I borrow your car? I might say no and just walk away. But there are other ways to say no. So, you can say no because, no, I can't bake brownies for the neighborhood thing because my oven's broken, or because I'm a terrible baker, or because the last time I baked brownies, I poisoned everybody, or whatever it is. You can also say no, but how about, oh, I can't bake brownies. I just don't have the time, but how about I swing by the bakery and pick up some brownies? How about I find someone else to make brownies? And then finally, I think in this day and age, especially for those of us who do not think on our feet, and our inclination is to say yes right away, is just to say, oh my gosh, I'm slammed right now. I need to get back to you. And what's good about this actually is a lot of requests these days do come via text or email. And so it gives you time to really think about whether or not you want to do something. And when we talk about being resilient, a really, really, really strong way to be resilient is to learn to say no. I know lots of people who say no. They're really good at it. They can say no and just walk away and feel perfectly comfortable. But try some of those other ways, because I suspect, there's an expression somewhere in Asia that says saying no to someone else is saying yes to yourself. And I really like that because I think it can be self-protective. Next slide, please. So, one of the things I really love to do, and I do this whenever I'm like giving a talk, is to talk about the concept of self-nurturance and learning how to add more joy to your life. And what I tell people to do, and I just did this Tuesday morning, was I handed everybody a piece of paper and I say, I want you to, as fast as you can, write down 20 things in your life which bring you joy. And it can, I love flowers. Unfortunately, my husband's allergic to most spring flowers, so I don't know what I'm going to do. But, you know, if you like flowers, if you like snacks, if you like, being outside and you want to go for a bike ride or a hike, or you love hugs or back rubs or cuddling, or, these days everyone's binging on some kind of favorite show or movie. Or they're spending time with friends you can count on, or being creative. I mean, a lot of us took a lot of art classes when we were kids and we stopped doing it, but there are things that people might still love to do as adults. And you might like to dance, you might like to bake, you might like to garden. It's a great time of year to be gardening. And in general, the rule of thumb is things that you love to do as a child, you probably still love to do. And so I've had so many patients, and I'll say, what were your passions when you were a kid? And, one of them would say, oh, I love ballet, but I stopped when I was 8. And they went back and took a ballet class. And like I took ceramics in high school and realized I still like doing it. So what I'd like you to do, when we're done, is as fast as you can, write down 20 things in your life which bring you joy. And think about how can you add as many of them as possible on a day-to-day basis to bring you joy. Because being more joyful brings more resilience. You will feel stronger because you'll be taking care of yourself. And so if you feel self-protected and self-nurtured, it's going to make you more resilient to the dips in your life. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Ali. I think we were on the last slide.
Okay.
I hope everyone had opportunity to reflect, and we can open the session with Q&A questions. So
Yeah, any questions? It doesn't have to be just about resilience. Anything you think I have a chance of answering is fine.
perfect. We just received a question. How can I communicate what I need emotionally to my partner, friends, or family when they haven't been through this process?
It's a really good question, because I think a lot of people feel that you have to have been through infertility to be a good support system. And I don't think that's true, because when I think of just in my professional life, I feel like I've supported patients with all kinds of different challenges that I haven't been through. And I still think I can be a good therapist. And when I think of the crises that my patients go through, sometimes it's surprising to you who can be, comfortable and helpful to you. So just because someone hasn't been through infertility or hasn't been through pregnancy loss doesn't mean they can't be there for you. They may not know how. And so, I'm trying to think of a way to say this doesn't sound awful, but it's not fair to be running around, anybody, not you, for someone to be running around saying, oh, my needs are not getting met, but they don't even know what their needs are, let alone having communicated those needs to anybody else. So I think the first task all of us have is to figure out what our needs are. And once we figure out what our needs are, figure out how to get those needs met. So figure out your needs, write them down, put them in your phone. What are your needs? I need to get hugged. I need someone to do grocery shopping. I need someone to walk the dog. I need my feet rubbed. I need someone to just listen to me talk about how painful it was that my last cycle didn't work. I need someone to ask me what I'm scared of. What do you need? I can't tell you what you need. Your partner can't tell you what you need. You need to figure out what you need. And then who in your life is capable of meeting which needs. So if you have a partner, I can tell you this, I've been in couples counseling for a long time. And the number one myth of every relationship is that if my partner loves me, they're capable of meeting every one of my needs. And that is complete, sorry, BS. There's no way. I have a great husband. He can't meet all my needs. I can't meet all his needs. So you need to figure out which of your needs your partner is capable of meeting. Which of your needs is the rest of your family capable of meeting? Which of your needs is are your friends capable of meeting? If you have a church or spiritual organization, which of your needs is can be supported by that? What about people at work? And then maybe the most important thing of all, which of your needs can you meet yourself? Because again, women are so bad at self-nurturance in general. But you know, if you need a back rub and your partner won't give you a back rub, go get a massage. Go for a walk. You know, as I said, even where I live, the hyacinths are blooming. I go out my front door and it smells really good. So think about what you need, figure out who can meet that need, and get that need met. And be vocal about it. You know, so many people are so anxious or nervous or hesitant to talk about what their needs are because they think it makes them too vulnerable. But you're just going to be miserable and unhappy if you have all these unmet needs and you've never even asked anybody. We make these assumptions that other people can't meet our needs. Well, you know, give them a chance.
Thank you. Thank you, Annie. Our next question, I feel guilty when I'm taking break from the treatment. Do you have any recommendation how to deal with that?
I would say celebrate taking a break from time to time because, you know, a lot of the research I'm doing right now, and in fact, this manuscript I was supposedly writing today, is on why insured people drop out of treatment and what we can do to keep them in treatment until they have a baby. And I think people have this concept that they have to just go cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle. And I think pushing yourself too hard is going to make you drop out because you're going to burn out. And it's going to be much better for you maybe to take a month off in between cycles, unless your physician says because of your age or your AMH or whatever, you really have to hustle. But otherwise, taking a mini break in between is probably going to increase the chances that you're going to build up your strength in between cycles, and that will keep you in treatment until you get pregnant. You know, burnout is really true. It's serious. It's treatable. It's preventable. But we have this idea that we have to push ourselves all the time, and we don't. We need to take breaks. Consider yourself under doctor's orders. Take a break.
Thank you. Our next question, is actually a few. I'm considering donor options and I'm struggling. How do I support myself emotionally?
So moving from pursuing genetic parenthood to pursuing non-genetic parenthood, such as egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, or gestational surrogacy, it's a big step. You know, as one of my patients said, it's not your first choice, but it's not second best. And I just love that. It's a big step. And I think that what I, as a psychologist who sees patients who are making that step, what I don't want to see is somebody moving on from cycling with their own egg, sperm, uterus, et cetera, and then move on to third party just to stop the pain. Because that's not fair to you, and it's really not fair to the baby. And so if you have decided that you or your physician has recommended that you need to stop treatment with your own eggs or your partner's sperm or your uterus or whatever, you know, first of all, if it's a donor egg, the clock stops ticking. You can take some time off, but you know, and I don't mean to sound mean, but you kind of need to mourn. You know, when we think about what our kids are going to be like, we think that they're going to have, you know, our dad's smile and our mom's sense of humor and things like that. And when you move on to third party, you're giving up something. And so you do have to mourn. If you have a partner, you have to mourn what you thought the two of you would look like. You know, unfortunately, we all have these ideas that the kid's going to have your curls and your husband's nose, and it may end up with your nose and his baldness. So you can never guarantee what's going to happen. But if you decide you want to pursue third party, it's a really good idea to give yourself a little bit of time to mourn, because you should not move on to third party until you want that baby. Because third party pregnancy rates are so high that if you pursue third party, you probably are going to have a baby. And it's only fair to you and your family, and most especially that baby, that that's the baby you want.
Thank you. We actually just received a question, similar question. My husband and I struggle with the idea of using either donor eggs or donor sperm, and we think we would prefer donor embryo at this point. because otherwise, one is more genetically related to the baby. Any advice?
Well, so here's how I look at it in terms of how I counsel people. Donor egg and donor sperm is a very, very different thing. I mean, doing donor egg is more complicated, more expensive, et cetera. But if you think about a normal pregnancy where a couple has sex and the woman gets pregnant, she has a genetic relationship to that baby because it was her genes, and she has a biological relationship to that baby because she's gestating, and her genes actually impact the genes of the baby. The man only has a genetic relationship. And so in a normal pregnancy, it's kind of two-sided. It's like 2 against 1. And so I feel with donor egg, you're kind of evening the playing field in that she has a biological relationship and he has a genetic relationship. In terms of donor sperm, that can feel unfair that she has a genetic and biological relationship and he has neither. And I understand very much. I've talked to lots of men who have imposed with, if you want to have a child, you need to do donor sperm. And I can tell you that the data for both actually is just phenomenal. Like these families are so healthy because these kids know how much they were wanted. And I remember probably 20 years ago, I was giving a talk, and I'm not kidding, the International Academy of Sex Research. They actually do have a meeting every year. And they presented this study where they had a group of kids, I think were about 18, and half of them were, kids that were conceived through sex. So they had a genetic relationship with their dad, and the other half were conceived with donor sperm. And they wanted to see what the father-child relationship was. And they actually found that the sperm donor kids had a slightly more comfortable relationship with their fathers because their fathers didn't pressure them to be like them. So, it's very natural if a man played football in high school, he would kind of expect that his son would play football in high school. But if his son was from donor sperm, maybe the dad wouldn't put so much pressure and just sort of take a step back and wait and see what this child would want to do. So yeah, it feels, when you're faced with a possibility, it feels catastrophic, no question. But if you give yourself time to mourn and process and think, I would highly encourage you to talk. There are about 700 mental health professionals in the US and a whole nother group in Canada who specialize in counseling people like me. No, not counseling people like me. Like I'm one of those kinds of counselors who counsel people who are thinking about doing third party. And gives you, we give you information, we give you things to think about, we challenge you about what biases you might have, and hopefully guide you to the point where that's the baby that you want. And that's the goal.
Thank you. Our next question, this journey is starting to feel like it's defining who I am. How do I protect myself of identity?
Yeah, because the fact is that when you go through infertility, you start to think of yourself as an infertile person, as opposed to, a mechanic or a lawyer or a gardener or whatever else. You just label yourself with that diagnosis, no matter whether or not you're male, female, non-binary, etc. And the fact is, that's why at the beginning I talked about infertility being a disease. And so whenever anyone is diagnosed with any disease, they become a diabetic, or they become a breast cancer patient, or they become, a multiple sclerosis patient. And that's really natural when you're first diagnosed with a disease. But eventually, here we are talking about resilience. People adapt. It's extraordinary. A study was done years and years ago. This is what I do at cocktail parties. I just come up with these obscure studies. But this is like 20 years ago. They found a group of people who had gone into kidney failure and had to go on dialysis. And they found a group who had won the lottery. Okay. And they started tracking them. So at the beginning, the ones who had kidney failure were very, very, very. Can you guys see me? I can't tell if you can see me. Can people see me, Irina?
I can see you, yes.
Okay. So the people obviously who were diagnosed with kidney disease and had to go on dialysis were very depressed. People who won the lottery were like out of their minds excited because they had all this money. So you had super depressed, newly diagnosed kidney dialysis patients and super excited lottery winners. And guess what happened over time? they equalized. Because people adapt, people are resilient. When I look at my patients who 5 years ago were absolutely desperately unhappy and horrible thoughts and miserable and were thinking of getting divorced and everything else. And now they have, two sperm donor children and they're like the happiest people in the world. It amazes me how resilient we are. So I would say in answer to your question, never underestimate your resilience. Never underestimate your capacity to love somebody who's not genetically related to you.
Thank you. Ali, do you have any advice on how to balance between staying hopeful and with being realistic about the outcomes?
I get asked that question by pretty much every patient I've ever seen. And you know what? You have to walk such a fine line. I mean, easier now because the success rates are better than they used to be, but you want to psych yourself up enough before a cycle to get you through the cycle because it's hard to go through a cycle. But you don't want to psych yourself up so much that you crash and burn if it doesn't work. And so what I tell my patients is before you start a cycle, get a realistic odds from your physician. And these days, all of these physicians have these really beautiful software packages and AI or whatever else they're using that can actually, plug in your age and your AMH and all the other stuff they know about you. And they'll actually spit out a number in terms of what they think your odds are for getting pregnant your first cycle or through subsequent cycles. And that gives you a sense of where your expectations should be. And if the number says 5, you may want to have a serious talk with your physician. Is it even worth the time, money, resources, and angst to do treatment? If it's 75, it's a whole different story. But you want to go into this with somewhat realistic expectations. I would also tell you, no matter what your odds are, I mean, first of all, I see miracles every day. Over Christmas, I have all my miracle pictures behind me. I forgot what I was about to say. I mean, yes, there are miracles every day, but you always need to have a plan B. Even if your doctor says, oh my God, you're young, you're healthy, you're going to have a baby, which a lot of them do, have a plan B. Plan B might be trying a different medication protocol or higher or lower doses of meds or, doing PGT or not doing PGT or getting a second opinion or losing weight or gaining weight or eating better or whatever else. You always should go into a cycle no matter what with a plan B. You don't have to stick to the plan B, but just have a plan B.
Thank you. Next question. I'm trying so hard to get pregnant through IVF, but at the same time, I'm terrified of being pregnant and especially of giving birth. I previously had 2 miscarriages, and I remember being nervous throughout those 2 pregnancies. If there's something wrong with me.
No, there's nothing wrong with you. First of all, a normal healthy woman should be nervous about pregnancy and childbirth because it's a big deal. You're basically trying to deliver a watermelon, which you don't think you should be able to do. But anyone who's honest, no matter how hard they've been trying to get pregnant, is going to be nervous about being pregnant. Pregnancy changes pretty much every cell in your body. You look different, you act different, you feel different. There's nothing wrong with you. But I would say if your fear of being pregnant again and or your fear of childbirth is holding you back from trying to get pregnant, I would see one of these mental health professionals. It's really easy. You can either ask your infertility doctor, and almost every infertility doctor has a mental health professional that either is in their clinic or they work closely with, or go to the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, so asrm.org. And there's this subgroup called the Mental Health Professional Group, and they list therapists by state. And as I said, I was with 300 of them last week, but there are some really great therapists out there who've heard exactly this from lots and lots and lots and lots of people. And they know how to support you, and they know how to help you, and they know how to guide you to getting to the place you need to be to build your family.
The next question, Ali. I'm struggling through this journey, and my partner doesn't want to talk about the emotional side of the treatment at all. Any advice? What should I do?
Yeah, that's really common. I don't know what your sex or gender is, but I will guess. This is the problem that in most couples going through infertility, no matter what their genetic statuses. There's usually one partner who wants to talk about it more and one partner who doesn't want to talk about it at all or wants to talk about it less. That's really normal. I'm not really thrilled if your partner won't talk about it at all because this is really hard on you and you need someone to talk to. So, my guess is you'll never be able to drag your partner to talk to a therapist with you. I feel like half my patients right now, their partners refuse to talk to me. And I just think that's kind of sad because they're missing a wonderful opportunity to support their partner as they build their family. But if your partner, for whatever reason, absolutely refuses to talk about it, talk to other women who know what you're going through. Ask your physician, do you have a support group in your area? Resolve, the National Fertility Organization, has support groups in every state. Inception has a really cool combination remote yoga and support group that's, I think, heavily discounted for Prelude patients. Being with other people who know how you feel can help you feel a lot better.
Thank you, Ali. One more question. Thank you so much for answering my question about being nervous about being pregnant. I'm actually brought a tear of relief to hear the words. There's nothing wrong with you. So
Yeah.
thank you.
I think everyone going through fertility feels like they're handling this the wrong way. And, my feeling is, I don't know, I've probably seen, I don't know, 25,000, I have no idea how many patients I've seen. There's no right way to handle infertility. The right way to handle fertility is the way that feels right for you. And so I can't tell you how to cope. I can't tell you who to talk to. I can't tell you what questions to ask. All I can say is you got to follow your gut and figure out what you need and get your needs met.
Thank you. That's all questions that we have today, Ali. Thank you so much for your time. It was very meaningful and insightful. I'm sure a lot of patients on the call appreciate the time with you today.
Well, I wish you guys all the best of luck. I really do.
And we just want to mention as well, we do those webinars once a month. I think our next webinar is scheduled at the end of April. So please register, sign up, and if you can't attend live webinar, it's absolutely fine. You'll be receiving a copy of this recording. So register for as many as possible, and you can watch them at your leisure.
And it's on how to cope with Mother's Day, which is my patient's least favorite day of the year.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great night.
Thanks, Irina. Thanks for coordinating. Bye-bye.
Good night.